now, as you're probably aware in this breaking news, Sue Gray has stepped down from the Prime Minister's top team already and has been appointed as the Prime Minister's envoy for nations and regions instead by Julius Caesar, I'm informed. Now, in a statement, she said it had become clear in recent weeks that intense commentary around my position risked becoming a distraction to the government's vital work of change. Well, I'm joined now by the Reform MP, Richard Tice. Richard, hello, good to be with you, my friend. Now, Richard, can I start by asking you, Henry Newman, who was a former government advisor, he has said, has Sue Gray's role gone through the Advisory Committee on Business Appointments because she's actually covered by business appointment rules for the next 2 years after leaving office, and she'll be envoying on the very area she was actually working on in government as a permanent secretary. So there could be really a rule break potentially here.
Let's focus on the overall issue here, Darren. Good afternoon. Which is that I launched a word back in January of this year called Starmergeddon, a new word in the Oxford Dictionary. Little to know, we realised that it would be Starmergeddon on absolute steroids, and shortly after that, they appointed Sue Gray, supposedly the grown-up in the room, supposedly the most experienced, wisest civil servant, to be his chief of staff, to prepare for office and government in a stable, successful transition. And what we've actually got is utter chaos that looks the chaotic Tory government look like a model of stability. I mean, just look at it. We've got cronyism from top to bottom across government, from suits to glasses, including actually the cronyism of her own son, newly elected to Parliament, being given a parliamentary post and position. Absolutely extraordinary. We've got the chaos around some of their key policies, rowing back on the non-dom issue, rowing back, we hear today, Darren, on the chaotic scenes around VAT, on school fees. We've got chaos in the boats yesterday, a record. That boat number of crossings yesterday was a record since November 22. So all of this supposed grown-up preparation for government by this individual actually has led to total and utter chaos, not to mention the chaos of Chagos. And the whole point of a chief of staff is to organise everything so that it's smooth and organised. The Prime Minister can rise above the challenges and the difficulties and everything be sweetness and light. And actually what we've got is exactly the opposite.
So what will Reform be focusing on then in regard to all of this once Parliament is back in session?
Well, Parliament's back in session tomorrow after recess, which frankly has gone on way too long. And we've got a very big day. We're putting in an urgent question with regard to Chagos. We've got a press conference on law and order tomorrow morning, which is very important and you must not miss. So, yeah, it's a very busy day indeed, and that's just going to set the trend of, frankly, what we've said before, which is we're the real opposition. The Tories are scrapping over who's going to be the irrelevant next leader of their party, and they seem to have missed many of these important issues whilst they've been sort of staring at their own navel. And it's us that, frankly, is leading the way, leading the agenda, leading the challenge and the opposition to this chaotic Starmergeddon nightmare that the country is living in.
All right, we'll see what you get up to next week. Thank you very much, Richard Tice, the Deputy Leader of Reform UK. I'm joined now by Nigel Nelson, GB News' senior political commentator. Nigel, can I ask you your opinion? You've been around the block, if I can be so impertinent. Now, the question that former Tory advisers are raising is, could this be a breach of the actually having gone through, whether or not it has actually gone through the Advisory Committee on Business Appointments, because Sue Gray's role in government as permanent secretary was actually overseeing the very oversight of areas that she was looking at, she will be looking at now.
Well, it'll certainly be up to business appointments to decide whether there is any breach. I suspect there won't be, simply because she got the job in number 10 and they cleared that. So I'd imagine that the new job as envoy for the nations and regions, and of course we don't quite know how that job will pan out, will probably pass the test. But as I say, it's up for business appointments to actually decide whether there is any kind of conflict of interest.
Yeah, I mean, the whole thing, all the comments, Nigel, are saying, oh, look, this has been dodgy from day dot. And actually, look, they're flabbergasted that actually this happened to begin with. Do you think it was a mistake appointing Sue Gray in the role to begin with?
Well, in the event that she's gone so quickly, yes, it would appear to be. I mean, I think that Sue Gray was a really effective civil servant, and she seemed to be tailor-made for the role she was given. But then events really conspired against her. So the problem over her £170,000 salary, which was £4,000 more than the Prime Minister, that pitched her into the public eye, which is one place she never wants to be. And of course, we've had all the problems over freebies, which one would have thought that she would be responsible for dealing with and advising the Prime Minister it's not a very good idea to take them. So for someone from the back room, she was then thrown into the forefront. And I can understand why she feels really uncomfortable with that position and wants to get back into the background again.
Yeah, I mean, just briefly, Nigel, how do you think actually this will be the saving grace for the Prime Minister? Do you think this will turn around and he'll, no longer be going down in the polls Titanic-esque?
I think that there are several good appointments that go along with this. James Lyons as the Strategic Communications Director. I know James. He's very good. He was formerly at NHS England. I think he'll do a good job there. Jill Cuthbertson is the other one, who is Keir Starmer's private secretary, promoted now to Deputy Chief of Staff. I've known her since she did the same role for Gordon Brown and Ed Miliband. She's very experienced and she'll be very good.
There she is, like magic she appears. Now, Miriam, what do you make of all of this? A lot of our viewers are saying, hang on a minute, I've never heard of this role, this envoy for regions and nations, and is she getting the same enormous pay packet that Starmer gifted her?
I've never heard of it either, and I don't know about the pay. I think one thing we need to wait to find out is whether she can do that role. I'm sure your viewers will have heard that there's a committee that government ministers and senior government officials have to be verified by before they can do a new role, to check that there isn't a conflict of interest with their previous high-profile role. I mean, I assume that that's already been thought about. She can go on to do this role, but obviously, until we know what it is, we can't know. But I think really what this is about is a power struggle at the heart of 10 Downing Street. It's very similar to the row over Dominic Cummings. You've got a Prime Minister who's worried that his staff are becoming a distraction. You've clearly got disagreements within the team. And obviously, they've made the decision that despite her enormous experience and the fact that she was brought on board to help Labour prepare for government, they've been out of power for a very long time, that clearly it's not worth it anymore because she has become the distraction. So that seems to be the story. But of course, what it calls into question is the power of unelected people around the Prime Minister. And I think this really goes back to Tony Blair's time in Parliament. Before then, I don't think anybody really knew who the officials in Downing Street were, who were running a Prime Minister's diary, who were doing their press. That wasn't kind of part of the package of our politics. Now it very much is. And I think, speaking as a former MP, it can be quite frustrating sometimes when you are the elected one, you're the one who's been put into the House of Commons by constituents, and yet actually the feeling that the country is being run, the decisions are being made by people who are completely unelected, unaccountable, and often unknown to MPs. Yeah,
I mean, Miriam, what do you think this means for the upcoming local elections? I mean, are you happier than a pig in muck?
Well, I personally am taking a break from party politics at the moment. But speaking as, I can never be an impartial observer, but speaking as an observer, it is extraordinary how quickly Labour have fallen in the polls. And of course, they've got this enormous majority, but they know, everybody knows, that was really because people voted in any way they could to get the Conservatives out, and they've won a huge number of seats without an awful lot of votes. And so they didn't have a great deal of goodwill to start with. And very clearly, that is dropping dramatically. So if things carry on as they do, then there's a good chance that the Conservatives will win back a lot of seats next May. But also, I think that Reform will do extraordinarily well. But one thing I was thinking this morning, though, is that people complained over the last 14 years that there was no difference between Conservatives and Labour. And I think that was a very, very fair criticism. But actually what's happening now is that Labour are showing their socialist colours. Obviously, this is a political row, but in the other policies that they're bringing forward, the loss of the Chagos Island, the VAT on private schools, all these other things. Actually, now there is a very clear difference between Labour and Conservatives. So maybe in the long term, that's good for our politics.
Yeah, I mean, it's a national reminder, isn't it, of what you get, really. But I wonder then, on the point of, you know, Stephen Pound is next to me right now, and he's been spinning like a sort of hot plate on goodness only knows what. But Stephen Pound says, look, this shows that Sir Keir Starmer is strong, he's willing to take the tough decisions and get rid of those who may be distractions to his government of change. What say you?
That may well be true, and certainly Boris Johnson tried the same thing with getting rid of Dominic Cummings. You try to remove the person that's become the centre of the distraction. But really what happens next is not predictable. For Boris, certainly it was the beginning of the end, sadly. Well, sadly from my perspective. And it may well be for Keir Starmer, because of course he has made this decision now. I mean, officially it's she that has resigned rather than him sacking her. But
well,
you know, we don't know what's
come on, Miriam, we're not that foolish,
exactly,
are we?
We don't know. But the question mark is, are the fractures too great already in terms of the team in number 10? And that comes back to my earlier point of why now do we have this system where so many unelected people have so much power? It's not the case that, of course, the Prime Minister has to have people who are managing his diary, managing his communications. Of course, that is true. But when it's run like a presidential office, this is very much like the United States one. You have a president, they appoint their team, they make the decision. That's not how our parliamentary system is designed to work. The Prime Minister operates with the consent of their MPs, and only with the consent of their MPs. And this is where the last government went wrong, and it looks like this is where this government is going to go wrong as well. So I think we need to get back to the power base being in Parliament, where the accountability is, because that's the people that people have elected, rather than the power base being this kind of unelected, underground network of people who most ordinary people don't know who they are.